It's like, what is weaving, right? It's a craft, but I also think of it as a process. So I'm always kind of trying to keep that conversation going. I try to work on my craft, but I also try to push that and see how to make it more expressive.
Hello, and welcome to the New York Guild of Handweavers Member Spotlight. My name is Katie Clements, and I'm the membership chair of the New York Guild. With almost 200 members, the New York Guild of Handweavers provides inspiration, information, and mutual support to anyone interested in weaving, tapestry, spinning, or fiber arts through speakers, workshops, as well as our lending library. Go to nyhandweavers.org for more information. Today, we will talk with New York Guild member Vandana Jain. Vandana is an artist and textile designer based in Brooklyn, New York. She received a degree in art and art history from New York University and went on to study textile design at the Fashion Institute of Technology. Her work explores the intersection of spirituality and consumerism through a variety of materials, including sugar, shattered auto glass, and artist tape. Recently, she has gotten her old loom back and started making weavings and sculptures from found materials. Jane's work has been exhibited both nationally and internationally. She has had solo exhibitions at Lakerim Gallery in Mumbai, India, the 798 Biennial in Beijing, China, Hall Walls Contemporary Art Center in Buffalo, New York, and at Smack Mellon in Dumbo, New York. Her weavings and sculptures were recently shown at King Manor Museum and York College Gallery as part of the Southeast Queens Biennial in Jamaica, Queens. So, welcome, Vandana.
Hi, Katie. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
I'm so looking forward to get into this. So we have a slideshow coming up. But before that, so a little history, a bit about yourself and your background.
Sure. I was born in New York. I was born in Jamaica, Queens, actually. And then I lived in the city for till about I was 8, and then my parents wanted to move back to India. So I had a childhood where I was moving a lot. We went back to India for a year. They blame it on us, right? Because of course it's the kids who didn't adjust, but after a year we came back. So we came back to Jamaica for a year, and then we moved out to Long Island, and then I went to school at NYU. So I'm pretty much consider myself like almost a native New Yorker. But since I didn't go to high school here, that's a debatable point. And, people will throw down about this. So I want to make it clear. But yeah. So I'm a fine artist and a textile designer.
And how did you get started in your art? What's been your art history?
So I think as a kid, I always loved doing crafts. Whenever we'd go back and visit my family in India, it was really amazing because all of my aunts knew how to sew, and they'd be painting on silk, and they'd be tatting and doing all this amazing stuff. And my mom hated all of it. She was like an amazing cook, but like she like crocheted one poncho and that was it for her, you know? But as a kid, like I just picked up like whatever I could learn. So I like learned how to tat, and I um friendship bracelets were all the rage, and I would try and like figure out different types of knots and like just to see if I could like write my name, and just all this sort of stuff. So I think there was something I always really responded to with string and thread and just having something so portable, but that felt limitless. And what actually led me to getting an art degree was photography, because in another way I think photography was just so accessible, and as I was like moving through all these different communities and spaces, like having a camera kind of felt like a shield almost. You could hide behind a camera, but you could also kind of capture the moment, and you kind of had this automatic acceptance of being present, which made it really easy to kind of be shy but to also have to constantly be in a new town or a new country. So I ended up going to school at NYU, and I majored in art and art history. And then I did that for a couple of years, but mostly that meant I had a job as a security guard at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I was a gallery girl for a couple of galleries. I worked with PPOW and Gracie Mansion. But eventually I ended up going back to get a certificate in surface design at FIT. What ended up happening was I was getting really interested in painting and patterns. And a friend of mine told me that they had a summer course I could take that would just focus on like patterns, repeats, and it was all done in gouache, which is just a beautiful medium. It's like watercolor, but it's opaque. It's flat, but it's a little difficult to work with. You kind of need to have a little bit of practice to kind of really get it to lay down the way you want. So the 6-week class was just affordable and it was just kind of like the right thing. And being there, I just realized that this was the perfect intersection of all of these things I loved. And I ended up doing their certificate program, which is 1 year long, which also I got to learn how to weave. So that's sort of what brought me into weaving. And the great thing about surface design was now I could work as a textile designer. So it's like a skilled job. There's a lot of opportunity for that. And it just made it a lot easier than trying to make my way as an artist. As you may know, it's just very difficult to make a living off of your work. So it's kind of nice to always have a job that you can rely on to like help keep you going.
And that it's a creative job.
I mean, and I love that I get to show up and make paintings. Like it's, you know, on a bad day, I might have to do it over and over and over again.
So the job making paintings, tell me more about that.
Well, by the time I got involved, it was already on the computer for the most part. But I pick up things really fast, and I was already working with Photoshop and Illustrator, so it was kind of like a really easy transition for me to sort of start with that. It really involves a lot of times at the places I work at, they will buy a piece of artwork from a studio, and then the CAD designer will take that and put it into repeat. We'll change elements of the design to make it suit the brand, and we'll work on color for season, for trend. So it's really kind of like it's you're not necessarily coming up with original work all the time, but a lot of times you might be trying to replicate a style. You might be taking the bird out, or you might be softening a hibiscus, or so there are all these like things that you may be very involved with the artwork, but usually there's something that's bought, and then you get to play around with it.
All those things contribute to just you constantly working with color and design
and pattern. I mean, I just in a way I always felt like being able to make all these really pretty things for both fashion and home freed me up to sort of have this conceptual art practice where then I could really let myself go. I didn't feel the need to make a beautiful painting because I got to do that all day. So I could kind of let other ideas happen. And I like to see that as something that as a gift that was given to me. So I started showing my work about like regularly about 2003. I had a few shows earlier, but I feel like that's when it really started to pick up for me. And I was working a lot with using corporate logos and making mandalas out of them. So a mandala is sort of a circular pattern formation in Buddhist art, and it's sort of seen as being the architecture of a cosmos. So it has a significance that's very spiritual. And what I wanted to do was sort of bring in these logos and kind of talk about how so much of what I saw, especially living in New York, but in our westernized society, was really this just need to buy things, this identity kind of being driven by like who you buy, what brands you buy. And the logos kind of became like a way to kind of put a pin in that. So I started exploring the themes of consumption, of capitalism, of waste, of identity, and with against spirituality, often utilizing pattern.
let's get into the slideshow.
Sure.
So let's talk about this first image.
So a lot of my work moved into creating ephemeral installations out of different types of materials. Where this is a large, I like to call it a drawing, but it's basically I'm using shattered auto glass on this carpet that was left over in this retail space at the bottom of Coliseum Mall out in Jamaica, Queens. So they had this vacant space and they wanted to bring more arts into that neighborhood. And they decided to put on a group exhibition. And I was invited to show a work from my series called Glass Diamonds. Um, and this work I developed for a gallery out in Newark. Again, it used to be on, it was a furniture store on a block of furniture stores when that is how commerce happened. When you wanted to buy furniture, you would go to the furniture district and you would look at furniture and you would buy from there. But anyway, as things were changing about this piece, I think was around 2000, and the first version of this was around 2009. They wanted me to inaugurate their space with, and we had been sort of talking about using this this type of drawing in India called rangoli, where people draw on the floor and they sort of use their hand as like a funnel and they keep like a little bit of pigment in here and they just kind of make a line with it. And it's used in a very decorative fashion. And I was thinking about what I could do for this space out in Newark. And I really wanted it to kind of take that traditional folk-based Indian tradition and make it into something that felt very urban and responded to like to my situation, to that location. So I decided to use this ubiquitous material, which Katie just told me is sometimes called New York ice. Windshield auto glass is often it shatters into little cubes so that it won't pierce anyone in an accident, right? So because of that, you have all this auto glass that's sort of this beautiful, cute, prismatic, reflective. To me, it just seems like piles of iridescence everywhere I go. So I decided to use that as my drawing material. And I chose to work with diamonds because surrounding that, in that area, I passed 2 or 3 pawn shops and they all had these diamonds that were featured on their awnings. And I was thinking about how this is sort of this notion of like just thinking about what we value and how we value it and the value of something as manufactured as a diamond versus something that's so ubiquitous as this auto glass. For me, it's like, how do we think about consumerism? And I think it's, for me, it's always like, well, what do we already have? What can already fulfill our desires? Like there's always this sort of inflation of desire that starts to happen. And I kind of want to think about how we can take that away. And again, one of the things I love about doing something craft driven, like weaving, is that it takes a lot of time and a lot of thinking. So I feel like it kind of, you can slow that down, that cycle down a little bit. So I call this piece Alphabet. And again, I started this series in about 2006, and it started with the AT&T logo. And I was thinking a lot about embroidery, and especially working in textiles. Embroidery is still one of those things that's really, you can accomplish it by machine, but it's very hard to replicate hand embroidery by machine. So there's, very specific things that you can accomplish, but a lot of times there's still a lot of work that needs to be done by hand. So I was just thinking about that and just thinking about, and I started thinking about samplers and just, the history of embroidery and samplers and like the 18th and 19th century, where you'd have these like girls basically creating their resume by making this little sampler that would have like a biblical, like a verse from the Bible, and it would show that they knew how to write the alphabet, and it would be very neat and tidy. And all of this was sort of like would just show what a good nature they had, and that they were, they knew the things they were supposed to know, and they would make a good wife, a good mom, a good person for the community. But I also started thinking about the world we live in and how most likely all of these embroiderers are now located all over the world. They're probably still about the same age, like 15. You know, if they can get away with younger, they might be younger, but probably 15 to 17, you know, young women. But now there's also this because it's global and they're working for these corporations. I started thinking about how they're learning about these different brands, and I started thinking about like how what is the alphabet if you start looking at it through that lens. And I thought it would be interesting to create an alphabet which would have this language of corporate logos. So each one of these pieces was hand embroidered by me. It's all wool on linen, with the dowels, with plaquettes on the top and bottom with half-inch dowels. And I sort of saw it as a way to use that corporate logo as the exterior form. And then the stitching was all sort of coming from me. So the whole piece sort of became a sampler of stitches for myself. This is really a learning experience for me. I mean, just the patience. Each piece would take about 20 to 25 hours. And again, just trying to figure out the best way to elucidate a different shape and to really kind of show off all the different stitches. And then this work is, I call it Sugar Mandala, and it's all made from blister packs. So I started collecting plastic packaging because I was really intrigued by the fact that someone had to design a shape to house a product so it could be on display. So for instance, what we're looking at here in the middle, you can see there are like 4 headphones. They're kind of like really large and bulbous that would hold headphones. And then you can see like these 16 sort of small airplane shapes. And there was a little tiny model airplane in that one. Another one you can easily recognize is a CFL light bulb. So I was kind of intrigued by this idea of this empty space. And I kept thinking about what type of material to cast into it. And I hit upon the idea of using a sugar recipe. I was looking at some calaveras, which are Day of the Dead sugar skulls, and they use a very similar mold. It's a clamshell mold, and they use this mixture of egg and meringue powder of sugar and meringue powder, and the meringue powder just kind of gives it that little so it doesn't crumble after it dries. But I really liked I liked using that material because I liked the contrast in my mind. You know, I was kind of referencing this deep tradition where of ancestor worship in Mexican culture. So when you make these calaveras, they're frosted and they're put on altars, and it's really meant to be in reverence of your ancestors. And instead, what I wanted to do was to take that same recipe but use it here unadorned and have it fill out these shapes, which are again becomes like an altar to our consumerism. So again, I kind of wanted to like take this unusual, you know, just kind of like play with the material. And also I really liked I liked the idea of using sugar because I think of sugar as really empty too, as something that's sort of like empty calories and just you know, something that like creates a need for itself. So a lot of my work, I'm always kind of trying to find the right marriage between material and idea. So I'll like hold on to something like the blister pack for a couple of years until I find the right thing that fits. And this piece has been also, and I also tend to work in series. So I've done this piece probably 5 or 6 times, and sometimes I'll only use one shape. Like there's a piece called Enlightenment where I only use the CFL light bulb shape, and it's just very simple. It's just a round circle.
So hear about this one.
So in 2019, I ended up getting back a loom that I had given away when I had to move out of my live workspace in Bushwick. And what's really interesting is when the loom came back, I had enough space I was taking a sort of a break from the way I had been working, and I kind of was feeling really frustrated by making installations because you do all this work and at the end of the day you have a great photo. And though I loved it, I also felt like I had kind of put it to bed. I had this really nice show up in Buffalo and Hall Walls, and I got to show almost like 15 years worth of work. And I felt really proud of that, but I also felt like I kind of wanted to move on. So I'd spent some time just experimenting. And I was working in the studio and just trying to figure out what I really wanted to do. And of course, somehow my loom ends up coming back to me. And what was really lovely is at this point, I felt ready to kind of, whereas before for me, weaving was something I adored and I loved, but I was still thinking about blankets and scarves and dish towels and fabric. I was really open and experimental at this time. So I just let go and I was like, what can I do with this? And this is the first piece I made when that happened. I had worked it up for it had been at a school, an elementary school, where an art teacher would like let the kids work on it if they were being really good that week. So I had put on this warp and there was still some residual warp. So I felt really free just to experiment. And I really just wanted to just kind of get back into it, you know? So very quickly I'm using a little bit of bubble wrap here. I did a lot of just kind of floating tapestry. And I was also just doing a really basic twill, herringbone. Sorry, pointed twill. But I really wanted to kind of emphasize the mistakes in it because again, for me, they were just so, it was like my first time being back with this thing that I love so much. And I loved everything. I'm like, the mistakes are even better. There was something I really liked about this piece and I still kind of hold on to it. I think it's like a guiding post for me. And I added these little triangles in mica flake because I felt like it needed a little something at the bottom. So this piece sort of just kind of helped reframe how I have been working with weaving, which has been my primary practice now for the last couple of years. Recently, I've been teaching with Sayori NYC, and I loved coming across Sayori because the whole philosophy of Sayori is just something that I naturally fell into with my work. But one of their first, they have four slogans, and the first one is consider the differences between a machine and a human being. And I think as weavers, it's something I think about a lot. Like, you know, of course, we can be the perfect weaver, we can have the best selvages, and we can have the most even beat and understand, you know, and of course, there's a place for that too. But I also like to just, I think, especially when I'm striving to make a wall hanging, I like to just also think about where is me in this, or how can I be present here, or what does that mean, both for myself as a maker, but also for the viewer. The next thing I did was I worked on a wide piece. This was about 44 inches wide. So I really wanted to kind of just test out like how big I could get. And this was happening right when we started being able to like move around again after the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So a lot of this work was coming from I was, you know, we really couldn't do very much. I didn't have access to a lot. We were at home, but we go on these long, long walks. And I started finding all these amazing things in the trash. And I think it was because people were just making space because we were all now working from home, living from home. The kids were at school in the apartment, and people just started like really trying to clear out what they could. And of course, no one wants to throw anything away if it can have a second life. So I started just collecting all this material during that early part of the pandemic. And then when I could go back into my studio, I was just like, wow, how can I take all of this and put it into a weaving? Like, what does that, I got really excited by the idea of just incorporating all these different materials. I really liked the humor in the piece. So I kind of wanted to bring it out. Like, I felt like this piece sort of became like the kitchen sink piece because I kept adding more and more and more. I was still like, when I was weaving, I was still kind of, it's so what we're looking at is a lot of embellishment on this piece. So once the piece came off, I'm like, wow, this is huge. And I feel like it's still I wasn't happy with it. So I kept adding things. I added embroidery and couching, and the flowers were inserted in, the skeleton with the fur came back in. So I kept adding and adding and adding. And I felt like when I was looking for something to hang it off of, the broom just became, it felt like it just needed to be. So I did buy a broom from the store
Well,
to,
it's
to put it on.
a pretty great way to hang the piece.
Thank you. I think again, I like the idea that that craft can be really funny.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I would think that's part of your personality coming through then.
this piece
Yeah.
was made on the same warp. I had already learned a little bit from seeing that first one come off. So in this, I was like thinking a lot more about striping and just thinking about different materials. The basic structure on this, I think you may have to close in to really see it, is
See.
an overshot. It's taken from, oh, I forget if it's the Green Book or the Eight Chef Patterns book. I'd have to look, but again, just kind of trying out different patterns. Um, all the way at the bottom is probably the most unique, one of the more unique things I've found, which is a clown wig. So it's sort of like a big curly bouncy clown wig. And of course, I'm like, how do I put this into a weaving? So it's basically set into a mesh. So it's acrylic hair set into this cottonish mesh. So I just did a spiral cut on the inside to make it linear. And that's so this piece again, I think it's all about just this contrast of different materials and also kind of overlaid into these like very traditional technique that's coming from, I believe, the 19th century. I'm using a lot of bubble wrap, a lot of these ropes that it's like we have so many materials that we use and we discard, and of course it's because when we need things, we need them, and we're no longer living in a time where we have to make our rope. So of course this is just how we live, but part of my what I see as my role as an artist is just to question these things, and these are the things that intrigue me.
Mhm.
So for instance, this is really amazing orange beaded necklace, and it's like you could kind of double strand it, but I really love the idea that it could span this, and then I could use a row of sumac in between to create this very specific kind of feeling. So again, I really want to kind of draw the viewer in and just make them think about these different materials as well as think about the craft of weaving. And then these are works. So these are smaller works, and these are all from a rigid heddle loom. So I also have a cricket, a 15-inch cricket, and I feel like what's really nice is I can experiment a lot more, and it's partially because the width is smaller. I can just the material goes a lot further, and it
Mhm.
can be a little more succinct.
Mhm.
So again, there's a lot happening here. I've been working a lot with I think people call it sakiori, but I think which is kind of like a Japanese type of inlay, usually done with silk.
Mhm.
It's just basically inlay.
Mhm.
The most prominent example here is the Lay's potato chip bag.
Wow.
So I just love this it's just such a creepy little smile to me, but I love the color.
Yeah.
And a lot of times these pieces are really coming from a play with color. And I love the way that bag and this bright green were sort of reacting together. So what I found most successful when using this technique is to kind of lay in like a puffer um weft behind it and
Mm-hmm.
then cut it into strips and lay that in on top. But it's really nice to be able to use like an old t-shirt or just a little trinket I find on the ground. And it, again, for me it's just this sort of interplay that can happen and serendipity, and I kind of want to take all of that and sort of like transfer it as well, and I hope the pieces do that. A lot of times I'm experimenting, but again, it's so I feel like there are always mistakes. There are always things that really bother me, but I feel like I try and just keep going, because I think that usually what results is sometimes better for just moving forward. And I think it's really hard to remember that. So these are just details which we can focus on. So again, it's just trying out different techniques. There's like this elephant is coming from a beer label, I believe, or something like that. And again, sometimes I'm just trying to see what happens. Like for me, there's just a lot of excitement and play, even just seeing different colors next to one another. And the one thing I always find amazing about weaving is that you're weaving in such a short, there's such a short space that you can see. So it's kind of got a limited memory, and I'm always doing a lot of composition on the loom. So it's always kind of exciting to me when it all comes off and I see it all together. And I'm like, oh my God, did it work? Does it still make sense? You know? And I also think a lot about, is this a way to sort of create to sort of honor these materials that we live with all the time? Like we cast them aside so quickly. Like we have now these 4-pack holders for beverages, but they take up so much plastic, and they're ostensibly recyclable, but I see them all the time. They're not in recycling. So I don't know. There's a lot of or there's just a lot of plastic in our lives. And I use it a lot as a comment piece. So this piece is funny. It was actually inspired by this weaving I saw at a restaurant. And I finally figured out the name of the person who made these weavings. So I've seen a few of them. It's Don Friedman. And for a couple of years, maybe in the 70s or 80s, he was working with craftspeople in India to make these weavings. And they're all kind of made out of like sisal, and they look very kind of primitive, within quotes. They look primitive. But I really liked how they looked, and I kind of made a sketch. I took a photo and then I made a sketch of the work. But it was really fun it kind of was really interesting because I sort of took what he was doing. He was kind of formalized these images, and he kind of formalized these inlays, and then they would be like shaped, and they would have fringe, and they would have cut pile. So they're kind of very artfully done, but they kind of felt like they might have been done in a small edition. I think he might have been working in like 50 to 100, maybe 200 pieces range. I kind of had the sketch of this piece and I wanted to make it my own. So I just had some of this rainbow dyed gradient yarn that's acrylic, and I was just working with the shadow weave warp and just decided to see what I could do with it. So I call this piece Artemis Rising. To me, it feels like it references a lot of sacred geometry, and I kind of wanted to bring that out. And again, I just wanted to just to see what these materials would do, using inlay, but using it in a more linear way, using knotting to create different textures, and then using the ropes again, to sort of just let them be rope. Again, it's to kind of like let the material speak a little more. Yeah, I love being able to bring the weft back in and then just see what happens. Again, a lot of it is very, very playful.
I remember you shared this at a guild show and tell.
I did, yeah. I was really happy with it. I was so excited to see it off the loom. Like sometimes I have no idea. Like sometimes the piece comes off the loom and I'm like, wow, that's what happened, But this one felt really nice. Oh. So again, working with like smaller areas, like I forget what it's called. It's just sort of sometimes weavers actually hate this when you only like build up weft in one area, because it does throw off the web. But for me, I'm kind of trying to emphasize and kind of stretch what can be weaving. So I find it really exciting to play around with it and then try and get back to a level line sometimes, or just see what I can do. And even here, like for instance, on the left of this sort of triangle where I'm doing the shadow weave, creating a white and a yellow in the middle, and then a white again on the right-hand side, you can see that I kind of go off my parallel because I want to hit the middle. But these are I think things that happen all the time, and it's again really interesting because at the end of the day, if I wanted to make it perfectly, I could just make a painting, or I could make a jacquard, or I could do it completely differently. And I'm just thinking about what happens well instead of what doesn't happen. It's so easy to become a perfectionist. And I think it's something that I fight against a lot. It's a lot to undo sometimes too when I do this type of weaving. I'm doing so many different things for each weft throw that it's sort of like if I went backwards, I would never do anything. So again, these are created on the rigid heddle loom. And I'm exploring more tapestry. I'm found a lovely pack of nail files in these amazing fluorescent colors. And of course, I'm just like, this is an amazing color. What would it look like if I just suspend it in like a Leno structure?
Wow.
So I have like a paracord running through there. And then I love working with like open mesh. So I'm always trying to create different levels of transparency. And then on the right, there's like a mask. I found like we were all buying masks, and I was like, what do I do with this piece of plastic? And so again, yeah, just different textures, different materials. Um, I really want to think about tactility, like I think Annie Albers calls it matériel. But it's this notion that that weaving is so tactile, and you to really think about the materials and to like really respond to what's at hand. And I want to do that, but I also want to think about the materials I'm constantly surrounded by. So I highlight not just like the linen and the cotton, or like these silk, or like these things that we traditionally kind of have reverence for, but also all this junk, this plastic, these streamers, vinyl, all this stuff that's trash too. So this piece I call the 5th of July. So again, the main pieces are is the blue is bubble wrap on the bottom, and then the red and the yellow are these things that you buy in a pack of 3 or 5 at a 99-cent store, and you basically just put them onto your hose, you turn on the hose, the balloons fill up and explode, and then it's done. So anyway, my brother had a party. It was like a birthday party for my nephew, and we had a lot of fun. And then I'm like, oh my God, can I take these? So I found a way to like put them into this little piece. And again, I kind of like it. It's very festive. It feels like a holiday. I added little tassels at the bottom and pipe cleaners at the top. And I think I want to bring in celebration into my work too. It's like, I don't know. I want the pieces to become what they replaced in a sense. So it's sort of like, how can I upcycle this into something that can give us that delight without us needing to buy these things, and even though they're already sitting in a warehouse gathering dust. But so this is a piece actually that I worked on during the pandemic a lot when I didn't have access to my loom. It was an IKEA cord organizer. I found out later by I think it had like a little sticker on the back. And it was just this wireframe shape, and I was really intrigued by these like U shapes. And I had also come across a 6-pack of this yellow yarn. So I was just like, well, what can I do with this? And I started just twining this yellow yarn around the shape. And again, I was kind of just experimenting with the shape to see what I could do with it. And then this piece is really a piece about accretion. It developed from probably about like April 2020 to maybe a year and a half. And I just kept adding different materials, different techniques. I started using a crocheted chain stitch as a decorative addition to the middle of those areas. I did knotting and eyelash fringe. I've been deconstructing this hollow this iridescently painted skeleton. So I've been deconstructing, like I came across one for free, and I've been slowly taking it apart and using it in all the different weavings. So it becomes this weird hide and seek game to like see what if one of it made it into a piece. But I had this at the center of this work, and I kind of covered it with like mica and some shells I had lying around. but the piece is titled Offer Up, Let Go, and it's sort of like a take on like a vanitas, and again thinking about us through all of this, the stuff that we own and all the stuff we value, and something so simple. Again, there's something so rewarding about the meditative aspects of weaving, and it was nice to have access to that. And this is a continual, this is a piece that I work on in my studio. It's all made from thrums. So whenever I'm working with these different materials, I try and like just save them all into a little bag. Then when I have enough, I make them into these little organza, stuffed organza bones. The bones are made out of organza fabric, and I leave a little opening in the middle, and then I stuff the thrums into them. So they become stuffed bones. Weavers have been wrestling with thrums for a very long time. And a lot of times they sort of get made into like little balls that can become like pin cushions, or all sorts of inventive things that weavers have done. And I'm sure we could pull together a really fun collection. But I just love all the different colors. So I really like when I came across this organza fabric, I like that you could still see all the stuff inside it. So it's almost like a plastic bag, but better because it's fabric. But yeah, so it's a growing collection, and there's a memory to, you know, I can sometimes remember the pieces I was working on because of what's in there.
All right.
And then I'm just going to leave off with two pieces. This is, I've been working a lot with the split shed technique, and just how you can make a twill kind of into either a 3-1 or a 1-3, just by kind of raising some of the shafts part way. And it's been kind of fun. So again, it's allowed me to kind of bring in like a looser way of bringing in larger types of patterning into the work. So for instance, I have those parallelograms at the top. I've also been trying to like work a lot with gradient yarns. So I'm using a gradient yarn in the weft as well as the warp. And then it's also, I can do like this checkerboard, and at the bottom you can sort of see I'm using sequins to kind of create like another zigzag pattern. And what I really like is the freedom of expression. I can kind of make up a pattern on the spot and just run with it. The one thing I've been realizing, like the next piece is a little wider. This piece is about 22 inches. This piece is about 43, 42 inches, I believe. It gets a little harder the wider you get, because you have to sort of be very careful as you insert the pickup stick. Sorry, my hand is slowly making its way through. And you pick up the right threads, and then you kind of lift it up to create your space for the shuttle. It's harder as it gets wider. So I think I prefer the technique, I probably would say, to around 36 inches. It gets a little unwieldy. But again, it does allow for a lot of interesting things to happen. The shapes that we're seeing in that black band are coming from the split shed technique.
Right.
The parallelogram that's sort of next to the red aquarium leaves, that's sort of below the painting. So this is so that parallelogram is also split shed. So it's just showing, you can see that the yarn is going all the way through, but in that area there is a 3-1. So it's weft faced. And there's just a lot of fun that happens with that technique. And in this also, I'm sort of bringing in back that inlay technique with a painting. It's actually a painting that my partner had discarded because he was doing some sketches. And I really liked the color, and I've really been wanting to just see what happens with different images and different types of inlays. So this was acrylic on canvas. And I kind of loved that I could also warp the image. And then at the top, there's a sort of, I used the basmati bag. So I kind of did something similar. But because of the burlap nature of those bags, it was a little rough. So I kind of emphasized the fringe of it, and just went with it. There are definitely times when I get stuck in a weaving. And it often happens right after I've warped and right before I dive in. Because I feel like once I start, then I'm on, and I have to be on. And I think there's a little bit of this. I mean, it's kind of hard to call it performance anxiety because it's just me in the room, but there's something about that blank canvas. There's something always about starting from scratch. And sometimes the best thing to do is just, I need that kick in the pants. I just need to get going. And even if it's just putting in a header, even if it's something that I'll just fold under afterwards and just hide out of view, it's something I can cut out. It's just sometimes I just need to get going. And that's just, it's really, really more important to get started, because once I get started, ideas start coming, and they won't come if I just sit there and look at this beautiful warp all waiting for me to go. I mean, and again, it's really been so incredible to work with, to know more about Saori teaching, because I do feel like all of their precepts I really believe with. There's some of the things that keep me with weaving. I mean, I think it's just important to just, again, like, be present in the moment, be okay with your mistakes, to kind of take inspiration where you can find it, to be bold and adventurous, I think, is another beautiful one. It's it's you can take a, you just there's so much scope. Like, there's this, what can you explore, what is there that excites you, and how do you bring that in? I think for different weavers it's different things. At times I've been like really interested in diving deeply into really complex structures. Right now I'm really excited about just sort of what happens when I open a shed and put in sequins, and then I have another shed, and what does that look like? Or, so I think it's a lot of kind of being open to be inspired and to just follow your whims wherever they may go.
How has living in New York City influenced you as an artist and a weaver?
I think it's still really amazing to go see stuff live and in person. And I feel like being in New York, we have access to incredible ancient textiles at the Brooklyn Museum and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, as well as like we contemporary weavers. And I love that range. I love the amount of inspiration, the amount of people that are working so hard, and you can just go and really see some amazing stuff.
What is it about weaving that you love?
I think I really like the level of play that I have in the process. So my process beforehand was very conceptual, in that I'd have an idea or I'd have a material, and then I'd kind of be like trying to find something else to pair it with. And then once I had that idea, it would kind of move into this design phase where I would kind of work out the details, and then I would be in production. Like, I would just make the piece. And that worked really well for me for a while. But I think that what I like now is that I can just get lost in all of it. So instead of it being all these separate stages, I feel like I'm just kind of more in my body and in a space of sort of just seeing, like, I think it's really interesting when you get into the state of flow, and that can happen a lot more easily with the weaving, especially with the way I work. I will oftentimes just sit down with a pile of materials, and then things kind of lead to one another, and then I'll be like, oh yeah, but I have this somewhere, and go burrow around, come across something else. And um I like that kind of experimental journey that can happen. um I'm not quite sure where I'm going next. I keep coming back to this technique of using images and inlay in the wall hangings. So I'm thinking about maybe centering a piece on that next. But a lot of it also just depends on what materials I come across. So I can start off with the plan and it gets totally waylaid.
So tell me about your history with the guild.
So I actually joined during the pandemic. I think it was very hard to go from being social and being part of just going to different friends' openings, and just having the society at work and all of this, to having nothing. So I was looking to see just more of what existed online. And I'd always heard about the guild, and I thought it was a great time to we could all be safe and in our houses and use Zoom. And I've been really enjoying our library. It's such a wonderful collection. And as so many of these books are so niche, they fall out of print. It's really nice to be able to see, just be able to hold one in my hands and to be able to kind of spend time with the technique. I love, especially though I know there are a lot of weavers who are artists and artist weavers, I don't know very many of them personally. And it's lovely that we have this place where we can share this craft, and we there's so many of us. We all have our different inspirations. We can all kind of share that, and it's really wild to be able to see how flax is grown and turned into fiber and then cloth, and just what is required of that because a guild, we had a lovely lecture about it, and to see someone's experiments with pibiones or horsehair weaving, again, it's really just such a huge field. There's only so much we can all touch on individually, so it's really nice to be able to have a more scholarly approach as well. One of the things I love about being part of the guild, especially now that we're meeting in person, is that I have access to all this knowledge through other people. So I can be like, well, you've worked with Tencel before. Like, how does it go? What are things to look out for? Or just kind of, can I come over and take a look at your setup? It's so nice to feel like I have access to that again, because I think that there's a lot of knowledge that we have within all of us and all of our different practices and our inquiries. And it's so lovely that we get to share that with one another.
What would you say to people starting out in art or fiber art?
I think there's a tendency to get bogged down in what you don't know. And I think it's always good to just keep going. Like, you're going to have mistakes. And the beautiful thing is, if you make cloth, it can always be a rag. There's always something you can do with it. It's the part of the process is just to get enough knowledge where you can make what you want. And there's always, I think with weaving, there is a bit more of a learning curve. But I think with the rigid heddle loom and with Saori, I feel like they both have they've really made it so much more accessible in different ways, where people can be really open to what is a finished product, or what does it have to look like to be successful. And yeah, I think it's just start slow, start small. There's always room for more shafts, and there's always the need there's always the need for another loom. It'll come in time.
And what's ahead for you in your work?
um I'm not sure what to. I've been actually kind of working on some much more experimental pieces on smaller looms. So going from the rigid heddle to just peg looms and even just cardboard looms. Again, just kind of really trying to deconstruct what can happen when threads interlace. Trying to explore patterns with just using paper weaving. So I think, yeah, I have a big piece on the loom right now, which I'm really anxious to see, which will hopefully be done in a week or two. And then I think I want to just work on some smaller pieces that are just more kind of formal and experimental. So again, it's like, what is weaving, right? It's a craft, but I also think of it as a process. So I'm always kind of trying to keep that conversation going. I try to work on my craft, but I also try to push that and see how to make it more expressive. But sometimes I find with the simpler looms, it really makes it like you really are confronting just that. What can I do with these warp threads? And we'll see what it leads to.
Oh, I look forward to seeing what it leads to. Thank you, Vandana, so much for sharing your weaving and about your work.
Thank you, Katie. It was really lovely to talk with you, and I'm so glad I got to share my pieces with everyone.
And thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please like, comment, and share, and subscribe to the NYGH YouTube channel. If you're interested in joining the New York Handweavers Guild, please go to nyhandweavers.org. See you in the next video. Until then, happy weaving.